Hello and welcome to another episode of EnVisioneering Exchange, the podcast where industry leaders discuss the most important topics in sustainability, climate change, buildings, and urban efficiency. I'm Vic Marinich with Danfoss, and I'm delighted to be the host of this podcast. You can subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Captivate, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we have Matthew Claxton of Plug and Play here to talk to us about circularity trends and best practices. Matthew, thanks for taking the time to join the show.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to have this conversation.
First, why don't we start a bit with your background and how you got involved in circularity and strategy and implementation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am one of the partners at Plug and Play. I also am our global head of sustainability. Been in the overall kind of sustainability space for the last coming up on 13 years now. Chemical engineer by trade, and really actually went into chemical engineering because I wanted to create the sustainable solutions of the future. How I got into kind of more specifically circularity was kind of serendipitously. I started my career in government R&D, working at NASA on algae-based biofuels and water recycling systems for the space shuttle. So, you know, the quote-unquote sexy part of NASA that no one really talks about. And then left actually when I graduated college and started my own company. And some of the piece of technology I came across was in plastic recycling. So doing plastic recycling for fuel production or other types of production. So there's a little bit more of the chemical recycling side, but also chemical recycling of tires into fuel. So got really excited about that technology and just really dove into it. I mean, I've been working in the space really ever since.
Super interesting path you took to get there. Maybe not the quite direct line, right? How about tell us a bit about your company, Plug and Play. How do you guys help other companies develop their circularity strategies?
Yeah, so Plug and Play had a pretty rich history, and just like my own career path has never really been a straight line to get here. Plug and Play also has never really had that straight line to kind of get to where it is today. So Plug and Play is about 20 years old now. It started really as kind of like a WeWork before WeWork existed, where our CEO was renting office space to interesting startups, getting to know them and investing, 25, 50, 100K into those companies. Some of those early companies that I mentioned were ones like PayPal, Google, Dropbox, Logitech. So very easy to say it worked out quite well for him. Along the way, corporations actually started coming through the door saying, we'd love to meet the startups in your building. Can you help them grow? Help us get connected with them because we really want to see those innovative solutions. So fast forward about 5 years ago, we started a dedicated sustainability platform. And that was because the corporations that were kind of coming to us or we were talking to were saying, hey, we really want to focus on sustainability. And it was a great fit for us because that was one of the reasons I joined Plug and Play was because I wanted to focus on sustainability and utilize the kind of power and network that Plug and Play has had to really shine a light on the sustainability industry and help those startups grow that had that innovative solutions. So for the circular economy side, that was actually our main piece of sustainability when we first started. So one of our founding partners, the Alliance on Plastic Waste, it's a global consortium of 75 corporations from all around the world and all across the plastics value chain that have come together with the mission of ending plastic waste in the environment. Collectively, they formed a $1 billion initiative, nonprofit initiative, where one of their main projects where we actually sourced and scouted a bunch of startups all around the world. I think we helped bring in 3,000 into our ecosystem. And we ran accelerator programs for them in Silicon Valley, Paris, Shanghai, Singapore, Sao Paulo, Johannesburg, Tokyo, and Riyadh, where we were accelerating the startups, helping them form. I think today it's been over 240 commercial pilots and POCs, and we've helped those startups raise over $200 million. Part of that work is actually helping them get connected with the member companies and helping form these larger engagements that are enabling real exciting solutions that are out in the US and all over the world right now. We can actually drive to some of them, if we're together, and see those solutions and see those commercial plants up and running.
Nice. Well, we'll have to take a virtual drive, I guess, one day, right? So at Danfoss, we like to say the greenest energy is the energy we don't use. I think that's a pretty straightforward, easy to understand, right? I mean, if you make a refrigerator, air conditioner, your washer dryer, or whatever more efficient, and, you were spending $100, a month on your energy. Now it's $80, right? You can see you're saving that energy. But circularity, Well, energy efficiency is kind of part of that deal. It's really so much more, right, when we talk about sustainability. So can you talk a bit about how you define what circularity is, and maybe explain to listeners how companies are finding the value in circularity, and maybe how it plays into their ESG goals?
How we've been defining circularity is really reutilizing resources that have already been kind of spent once. So trying to get them for their second, third, fourth, fifth, maybe even sixth or seventh life. I know I started out with talking about what we've been doing in plastics. And for that plastics piece, that has been how to get plastic that has been used by consumers back to recyclers. And then it can be either chemical recycled or upcycled or downcycled into kind of different end use products. For the upcycling, it's trying to get that, again, second, third, fourth, possibly fifth or sixth life, depending on the material. When it comes to kind of other areas of circularity, could be with recapturing waste heat from different types of equipment that are out there, recapturing energy that's being consumed for different, maybe water treatment plants or different types of industrial plants. So it's all about how can we reduce virgin materials or utilizing kind of virgin energy and recapture that and get that back into the system. And if we can't get that back into the system, then how can we create the products that are getting into the system? How can we help those be more sustainable, help them be more green? Some of that has to do with the materials, some of that has to do with the chemical side of it. But that's how we've been working with a lot of different corporations on their different ESG or sustainability goals. It's how can we help them create that circular economy pathways? How can we help them reduce their energy consumption or create more sustainable materials? And the products that we've been able to help them create or come online actually trickles down to some other of their vendors that they work with and helping them with their own sustainability goals as well. So it's this huge connection point that has been really exciting to see and just been evolving and growing very organically. And for me personally, it's been amazing to see the ripple effect that one piece of technology and one company can have, where it can be copied and pasted into other areas, and it can help others with their maybe scope 1 or 2 or 3 emissions as well.
Yeah, we always think of a product as cradle to grave, right? And so here we're really talking about, I don't know if it's cradle to cradle or what the right word is there, but it's really reusing it. And so the way we typically think of our products as, you make it and then it uses some energy and we can get some savings if we make it more efficient and stuff, and then we get rid of it. I mean, this is like a whole new level of evaluating that product. And I guess you really have to start at the beginning there. So if we think more on the HVAC side of things, where I focus, right, and lots of technical people and engineers, and technical people and engineers love to quantify stuff, right? We love our charts and our graphs and our ratios and making all our comparisons and all that kind of stuff. And what I've seen in our industry is a lot of that working to go specifically with HVACR products, looking on quantitative measures like life cycle assessments or LCAs and doing environmental product declarations or EPDs and that kind of stuff. Do you see those as tools that are also helping a company with their circularity commitments?
They are helping, but they're not the biggest source of help. I'd say they are almost part of like the diligence process as they are looking at how they can bring on new technologies or change up their existing materials or products to become more sustainable. One of the things that we've seen when we're working with a lot of different corporations, and for us at Plug and Play, I think we've now worked with over 115 Fortune 500 companies all around the world on their sustainability journey. And part of the benefit they're seeing is they're able to actually create new revenue streams or save money. In some rare instances, it's actually been both with particular products and different manufacturing processes. So, when we're looking at the types of software systems or processes that are going into it, the LCAs are really just like a check mark to make sure they're not going into the wrong direction, but they're going into the more positive direction. But really, that's just like the first step of the kind of overall diligence. It's once it passes kind of the LCAs and some of the other pieces, now it's okay, let's really test out the equipment. Let's do a lab test. Let's do a larger pilot. Let's do much more larger commercial scale. And then when we've been working with those corporations, what we've been finding is some of them are actually investing into those companies because they want to be part of that future with that specific startup, help them grow even more, and then, sign those larger commercial agreements. So we've been seeing that time and time again, and it's been great to see. And we haven't seen any real slowdown in it, despite everything else that's been happening around the world. It's been staying pretty strong in it.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times you have, let's say, tough times with the economy, and sometimes people's focus shifts away, right? Maybe from their longer term goals. So it's good to see things. The momentum is continuing. So before I totally jump off of the quantitative side of things, are there other metrics that companies use to measure, or how do you guys track progress towards becoming a more circular focused organization?
So some of the metrics that they've been using is how much of their material are they able to get back or avoid from going to the landfill that can get to a proper recycler, how much that can really get back into the system and be utilized over and over and over again. For us, when we're actually looking at it, and I'm an engineer, most of the people on my team are actually engineers, which is kind of rare for a VC in an accelerator program, but we look at a lot of the numbers. So we're looking at how much plastic waste have we been able to get away from the landfills or get collected in the environment? How much have we been able to get back into the value chain and it can be upcycled or downcycled into something else of value? But also we look at some of the soft metrics. How many jobs have we been able to actually create? How much capital has been able to get deployed into these systems and help those grow and just really kind of take on a new life of its own? For some of the corporations, some of the metrics they're also looking at is that financial side. So it's not only just purely the environmental, but is this saving us money? Is this actually generating more revenue? And where we're able to help these companies kind of find the financial aspect of it, we've been able to show them, here's how it could be financially sustainable. So not only environmentally sustainable, but financially sustainable. And that's what's actually helped them get through some of the tougher times or the shifts in focus and really get through a lot of that to keep it going in a really strong way.
I know with circularity, I think there's probably a lot more stakeholders you have to involve than the typical company. And you've got your customers on one side, you've got your supply base on the other side, and then you can work through some recycling issues or demand around energy reduction and that kind of stuff. But when you think really the bigger picture on circularity, what other stakeholders is it that you've got to involve? And, it's important to get them involved early, or when do you bring them into the picture?
At my time at Plug and Play, I have learned a lot on the different types of stakeholders that you need to bring in, some of which are obvious, some not so obvious, and when. I think ones that was kind of the more surprising one for me was insurance companies. And, we could talk about setting up these circularity projects in different parts around the country where you have the people that are gathering feedstocks, people that are actually recycling them, some that are taking that and use products. So you're mainly thinking about the more obvious ones. And then when you kind of dive deeper into it, it's okay, well, we need to get the financials. We need to bring in the financial players into it. The insurance players have been the most interesting because they said, hey, we usually get brought in too late. And then we have to unwind a bunch of stuff in these projects to make it fit the underwriting that we're doing and make sure it's compliant with what we need to see in order to actually properly insure this project or these initiatives. So time and time again, I've heard them say, bring us in early so we can say, hey, here's what we need to see as this thing progresses. We don't want to be that bottleneck, but just kind of give you that information early enough so that you can have a much more clear path in the future and it's much more likely to succeed in the future. Obviously, we help bring in different government agencies, both at the local level and at the federal level. And it's really us at Plug and Play. One of our jobs is just wrangling everyone together and bringing them together at the table and trying to move things together in one direction. It's not the easiest thing to do, but we've had a lot of practice with it. And it's, again, those not so obvious stakeholders that kind of catch us by surprise that we've learned some pretty valuable lessons from.
Who would have thought Jake from State Farm would be critical to getting projects off the ground, right?
Trust me, if I was a betting man, would not have bet on that one.
Yeah. But so you're saying there is a lot of momentum moving so far, but of course, things could be going faster. What kind of challenges do you see for these companies when it comes to trying to implement more circularity into the organization? Is it just getting started in the first place? Is it getting the motivation? What kind of issues do you run into?
Yeah, so I'd say it's going to be more kind of like late 2020 into 2021. The motivation was there. It then became, let's really understand this. Let's really educate a lot of our internal team members on this. What does circularity mean for us as an organization? What does being more sustainable mean for us? What are the business units we need to bring in? Is this going to be something that's from the bottom up or top down approach? So it's a lot of that buy-in, and a lot of that buy-in has happened over the last few years. A lot of that education has happened over the last few years, and the standards and language is becoming a lot more universal, where it's kind of understood the same now in Europe and North America and Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America. So that commonality and that universal language has helped a lot in breaking down some of those barriers, because there was a lot of just translations that needed to happen of how people understood stuff. Where we're at now is really scaling up those pieces of technology, scaling up those initiatives, because a lot of those really small early pilots and POCs have been done, but there's still this quite a big mismatch between where the startups are and what major corporations are looking for. And the mismatch is the scale. So scaling up these technologies just takes time. It takes capital, it takes engineering, it takes patience, and just R&D. You can speed it up a little bit with hiring some more people, trying to speed up that R&D, trying to speed up that build. But at the end of the day, it's science. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes trial and error and reassessing and reevaluating. And it just takes time to really get there. The regulatory factor with building, because at the end of the day, sustainability projects are really just construction projects, hasn't been as big of an issue. It's really the R&D and just getting the relevant stakeholders to build and work and be patient with getting those systems to a scale that then they can transfer over to those corporate partners that will say, hey, we want those turnkey solutions and now we can use it.
And how do you see it these days? Is it more a pull from those big organizations kind of demanding these new technologies, or is it a push from the technology side out into the mass market?
I'd say it's been more of a pull from the larger kind of corporations and saying, we need these types of technologies. Every now and again, you'll have startups that have kind of just created something completely new that the corporations never really thought of. But when they see those types of technologies, they get pretty excited about it. And they say, oh, we really want to test this. Might be a great competitive advantage for us in order to sell something new to our customers. But a lot of it has been a pull. And that's, again, the frustrating thing, I think, that we've been seeing between the corporations and the startups. Corporations saying, we want these technologies, but they need to be at a certain scale. And the startups are saying, okay, we have the technology. We're not quite at that scale yet, but we need more time. And it's that patience and that time that's really that kind of, not the valley of death, but the valley of difficulty, I'd say.
Yeah, but I think it's good. It's a pull coming from the market, right? Because that means the demand is there, right? People are waiting. If the most frustrating part that you have is you can't get that solution out to the market fast enough, right? That's kind of a nice problem to have, as opposed to, hey, I have this really cool thing, but nobody understands why they should want it and no one's asking for it. So it sounds like then we're in a really good place here now. And of course, circularity, that's really just one piece of the global sustainability picture. Are you seeing other trends out there on a larger scale? And how do you see these impacting the businesses and circularity initiatives and so on?
Well, I'd say the biggest trends we've been seeing is a lot, obviously, with decarbonization, energy transition. So we've seen a lot of really exciting companies on the carbon capture side. But for us, we're also looking at what do you do with that captured carbon? So that carbon to value startups, the ones that are actually taking that carbon and turning it into sustainable aviation fuels, into textiles, into greener chemicals. That's been some of the more exciting pieces and technology that it's going to take time to scale. Scaling the carbon capture side, that's one aspect. And that is actually moving quite well, as there's been a lot of capital that's been going into that space in 2021, 2022, and 2023. But now we're seeing the capital kind of shift a little bit more into that carbon value, where you can sell those products or you can sell that into that end use market. But again, that's going to take time to really scale those solutions. I'd say on top of that, we've seen a lot of, obviously with everything in the EV battery space, we're kind of looking towards that next big frontier. As the capacity for EV batteries are being built up, they're getting deployed into different renewable energy systems, energy storage systems, obviously for EV cars. We're kind of looking towards the future for that EV battery recycling side of it. So as we've seen kind of in the solar industry, as things are kind of spent up, what do you do with it? So we're really trying to think long-term on how do you get those batteries back to a recycler? How do you properly break those down? How do you get those precious minerals back out, put into new batteries so you don't have to keep mining it from new sources? So we're really trying to think end to end on that. And so I think, for me, carbon capture, carbon and value, and part in that vein, the sustainable aviation fuels and in the EV battery recycling space, those are my biggest ones. On the energy transition side, a lot of it is just execution and getting those technologies out there, getting into a scale that the utilities can really utilize those. And we're starting to see some really exciting technologies come online, but it's going to take time. And one of the things I've heard quite a bit, and this was really when generative AI was like first coming online, it was like, oh, it's going to solve a lot of the sustainability problems. It will be a tool that's used, but it's not going to be a solution that's really out there that can make a massive difference. We have a physical problem and you need a physical solution to solve it. So that's why I'm kind of leaning more towards capturing that carbon and a little bit more into the circular economy side with the fuels and for the battery pieces.
Yeah, it's super interesting you mentioned on the carbon capture, right? Because normally you hear carbon capture and sequestration, right? So, and you always kind of think, okay, maybe we can blast it into space. Maybe we could bury it deep in the ocean. Maybe we'll put it in whatever old salt mines and that kind of stuff, but it's still around there. So the fact that there's people out there looking to do something, bring value out of that captured carbon rather than just trying to find a hole to cram it in. That's super interesting to see that there's all kinds of ideas out there. That's really nice to hear.
And part of that is how to make it more financially sustainable. We can bury it underground. We can, send it wherever. You're just paying for carbon credits. But how can we turn that into value and make it something where it's like, oh, it'll help boost up the demand even more.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of any of those kinds of projects moving forward, but good to hear that. You had mentioned you've been doing a lot of projects, globally, and the audience here, I think we're mostly here in the US, and typically we lag a bit behind, I think, what Europe is doing. We're being Danish owned, we get to see a lot of the stuff that's happening over in Europe pretty up close. And of course, they've had some, let's say, motivation to get away from burning fossil fuels and all that kind of stuff. How do you see it now? You've mentioned some pretty exciting projects. Do you see that the U.S. is kind of catching up and is starting to get that momentum and moving at a decent pace? Or how do you see the adoption of circularity here locally?
I would say the IRA actually changed a lot of stuff in the sustainability space. It took us from U.S. is lagging to U.S. is leading. And we're seeing it really in all different aspects. And the implementation of circularity at more the local levels, but it's really, we're starting to see more and more startups in the US. All the funding is actually not only happening in the US, kind of from US companies, but it's also pulling in capital from international players all around the world that want to invest in these solutions. They want to be financing them. They want to help them scale and they want to be part of it. So for us, it's been really exciting to see just how consequential that bill has been. It's a very complex piece of legislation. There's a lot of capital behind it, and we completely get that. But the way that it's been designed and executed has been quite masterful and set up in a really strategic way that it's survived, several debt ceiling negotiations. It's survived changing of hands of Congress. It's going to survive a lot of stuff. And it's something that no one is really asking to go away. In fact, they want to see some of it expanded or kind of changed slightly. And we've had a lot of conversations both with the public and private sector, and not only in the US, but in other parts around the world. And they are really seeing the US as like the shining example of how to drive sustainability. So we went from lagging to really the leader by far in a pretty quick instance. Once people kind of understood the IRA, once it started to get rolled out and see the impacts of it, the pace has been quite exciting to see. We're not really seeing it slow down at all. So yes, we've been lagging in some aspects, but we have very quickly caught up and are now leading in that shining example.
Any specific cases you might want to highlight or share?
Yeah. So, on the carbon capture side, the fact that we're building the largest direct air capture carbon plant right now, 18 times larger than the current existing one that's out in Europe, is fantastic. We've seen a lot of capital going into the startups out here, far more than what we're seeing in European startups. And we've seen companies out of Singapore, out of Japan, out of Germany, France, the UK, saying, hey, we want to invest in the US solutions because we're seeing those technologies really scale and really make an impact in the types of solutions we've been searching for, but haven't really been able to find in their own backyard. Same thing on the kind of recycling side. We're seeing more and more privatized waste collection being set up, more and more recycling systems being set up in different cities in the US. And then, even for us at Plug and Play, we're setting up more and more sustainability hubs in the US, or really North America, compared to what we're seeing in setting up in Europe. And a lot of that has been because of the IRA, but also because the private sector is asking for it. They're demanding these solutions. There's a lot of great ingenuity out here. And we have really been, again, that shining example where numerous corporations from all around the world, they're looking for the solutions that are coming out of the US. And it's been great to see. If I can go back in time and say, I want to start my company now, this would be a great time compared to 2012, 2013, 14, when not as exciting in sustainability and a much more rocky road. So yeah, I can't give specific names of companies, but I will say they're all looking to see what's coming out of here.
If you're one of those companies and you haven't started your circularity journey yet, but of course now you listen to this podcast and realize that you want to jump on board, right? What kind of recommendations or suggestions do you have just to get started and get the ball rolling?
Yeah, so compared to maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there's substantially more resources online. A lot more articles that have come out from one of my favorite ones is Sightline, formerly CTVC, that really studies where a lot of the technologies are, where a lot of these startups are, where the capital is going, where it's coming from. It's a great place to understand what's happening in the world. We're also, as a Plug and Play, are also more than happy to chat. We do this every single day. In fact, I had 2 calls this morning on we want to start moving into sustainability or more seriously into circularity. Where do we start? And we start with kind of telling them, here's what's happening in the landscape. Here's where we're seeing a lot of different startups, different technologies. But if you're more thinking about how to start this internally, it really gets to where can we improve our sustainability journey? How can we become more sustainable internally? What are the different business units that we need to bring in? Where are the different leaderships that we need to bring in order to properly execute this? And really trying to form that strategy and saying, what can we do internally? And then what do we need to bring externally in-house in order for this to really succeed? And then really creating that pathway. One of the pieces of advice I'd have for companies that are just getting started is don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. What we've seen time and time again is companies saying, well, we need to figure out the exact pathway. We can't do anything until we figure out the exact pathway. But there's been a lot of great resources that say, just get to the first 30% and then start implementing it. Build that momentum. Now do the 30 to 60%. Build that momentum and just keep it going from there. And that is really a great way to get started instead of trying to figure out the whole thing and say, okay, well, we need this solution at this scale. Of we can't find that. We're not doing any of it. So it's really just, educating, getting started, and not being afraid to make mistakes or to try stuff. And I know it's scary for a lot of corporations, but a lot of benefit comes from taking some risks and trying it because you might get rewarded in an amazing way.
So just a last question. Anything I forgot to mention, forgot to ask, or anything you want to say before we sign off here?
So for sustainability and circularity, it's a very interesting space. It's quite different than a lot of different industries that are out there. One, it's not one particular industry. It touches numerous different industries. And it's a space that it's really easy to go negative. Oh, things are going wrong or the solutions aren't there. Just it can get quite depressing. But really my best piece of advice for everyone and kind of the last thing is stay positive, engage with individuals, engage with other companies, learn from each other, and really just keep moving forward. And you'll be amazed with the progress that you create and have in your own circularity journey and ultimately your own sustainability journey as a whole. And don't be afraid to reach out. Reach out to myself, reach out to others in the space. We're more than happy to chat about it. And we'd love to get more and more passionate individuals to the table because the more people we have, the more brilliant minds we have, but also diversity of opinions and experiences, the better results that are going to come from it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. So that's it for this episode of EnVisioneering Exchange. I'd like to thank my guest, Matthew Claxton from Plug and Play, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Don't forget to subscribe to EnVisioneering Exchange on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Captivate, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate, review, and share it with your network. Thanks for listening, and talk to you next time.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the EnVisioneering Exchange podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and not necessarily represent those of Danfoss LLC and its employees. Danfoss LLC is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the podcast series available for listening on this site. This podcast series does not constitute professional advice or services. This podcast, including Danfoss LLC and the producers, disclaim responsibility from any possible adverse effects of information contained herein. Opinions opinions of guests are their own, and Danfoss LLC in this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility of statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about the guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is available for private, non-commercial use only. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute this podcast. The developers of the EnVisioneering Exchange podcast site assume no liability for any activities in connection with this podcast or for use of this podcast in connection with any other website, computer, or playing device.